Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's lecture. It is my pleasure and great honor to introduce to you somebody who's new to summer and winter school, Patric Tariq Mellet. Patric Tariq Mellet was born in 1956 in District 6 to a single mother who worked in a laundry shop. He was raised in District 6, Salt River and Woodstock. He is a veteran of the liberation movement and the trade union movement and returned to South Africa after 14 years in exile. While in exile, he ran the Liberation Movement Press, producing underground literature, and served on a number of editorial boards of the ANC, MK and SACTU. Patric also served, when he came back from exile, he served as the first head of public relations at Parliament for Speaker Dr. Freni Ginwala. He also served as advisor to the Minister Naledi Pandor. Tariq has written 3 books. Lenses. The first one is called Lenses on Cape Identities, Exploring Roots in South Africa. The second book is I'm September, Colored by Decree, Liberated by African Heritage. His latest book, The Lie of 1652, is his lifetime work on the intangible heritage of the Cape. In 2009, his lifetime work on the intangible heritage of the Cape received a Western Cape Provincial Honours Award. In 2019, the Minister of Sports, Art and Culture appointed him to the Governance Council of the South African Heritage Resource Agency. He has a master's degree from Buckinghamshire New University with a dissertation on heritage tourism, Cape slavery and indigenous people. Over to you, Tariq.
Okay, so this first, today is the first of 2 talks. The other one is tomorrow. And overall, it's entitled 1652 Perspectives on the Peopling of the Cape. And the 2 lectures break down into today's one, which is Reflections on the Book, The Lie of 1652, A Decolonised History of Land, and how the research was done and what frames the lie. And then tomorrow it's reflections on the making of the Camisa Museum, which is a project that is born out of the book Lie of 1652, and that deals with the peopling of the Cape and also with the early referencing to the peopling of South Africa over the last 2,000 years, as well as seaborne forced and coerced migration. So that's tomorrow. This first talk covers the approach taken in the book, The Lie of 1652. It challenges the historical paradigm of colonial history that was taught to us in schools, universities, and through the popular media. And though the provocative title, Lie of 1652, suggests a lie singular, the book actually covers a number of untruths and distortions, not a single lie. And it provokes some thought-provoking alternative perspectives that is there to, this isn't the last word on South African history. It's about presenting thought-provoking alternative perspectives that go on to encourage scholars and the public at large to use this disruptive set of perspectives to go and do further research and writing and expose the many more hidden facts about our past. In fact, its aim is restorative memory. So just to start off, what are these challenges? A summary of the challenges that the book presents. The first one challenges our view of early South and Southern African social history over prehistoric times and ancient history. And then it goes on to challenge our view on the founding of the port city of Cape Town, which we'll deal with in depth in this talk. The third thing is it challenges our views on, when I say our views, the views that we have been brought up with on land dispossession, and it brings a perspective on the 19 wars of dispossession and resistance over 227 years. And it breaks a paradigm where in our, the way we've been brought up is to think of that there were these 4 wars in the Cape, and then there were 9 wars in the Eastern Cape. And it's all part of that divide and rule perspective in history. I talk about 19 wars of dispossession over 227 years, and I don't ethnicize it as it has sometimes been ethnicized, because all South Africa's peoples participated in those wars. And then it challenges our view on migration to the Cape over 400 years, and the fact that, you know, over 2/3 of that time, there was more African and Asian migration, forced, coerced, than there was actually European migration. And there are over 195 routes of origin that come into that story. So then it explores the introduction of race classification and the splitting of Africans into categories called native and colored. And of course, native evolved from native to Bantu to an ethnicized version of black. And then finally, it contextualizes this in a decolonization perspective that emphasizes restorative memory and its relationship to restorative justice. Without restorative memory, you cannot craft restorative justice. So in today's talk, I'll simply introduce you to one chapter of the book, that is chapter 2, and what led to the thinking behind the questions and the perspectives raised in the book, and why it's important to the here and now, and also to the way we view each other in modern day South Africa. And then also it's important to navigating our way forward through what is a minefield of complexities created by our colonial and apartheid past, and indeed also through this, let's call it this twilight neo-colonial present. So I put it to you that when we talk about the lies and the distortions, there are a number of theoretical and pseudo-history frameworks that still dominate our thinking and discourse today, and it dominates the way we think about history. And these can be summarized in 7 statements, and I'm going to state these as they are argued. So the first statement is social history in South Africa and Southern African history starts with the European engagement with the region, and anything previous is simply put across as periods of Iron Age and Stone Age primitivism, and that there was no civilization. And that first chapter deals very much with that. Secondly, second statement, most of South Africa was only inhabited by a noble, savage, primitive Bushman and Hottentot, Khoe and San people, part human, part beast, requiring civilization, regarded as so-called first people related to Europeans as a lost Hamitic people rather than to Negroid sub-Saharan Africans. Again, that's a statement that dominates, and by the way, this dominates not just the conservative, it sometimes dominates progressive thinking too. Thirdly, another statement, effectively South Africa was an empty land, terra nullius, on the arrival of the Europeans, who checked an invasion of a hostile alien black Bantu migrants, and in doing so, the Europeans stood with their ancient Hamitic cousins, the so-called first people, to repel and check the black alien invaders. Another statement, the Europeans founded the port of Cape Town and brought civilization and economic development with them, and negotiated favorable transfers of land to themselves with bona fide representative. They did this negotiation with bona fide representatives of local indigenous people. There was no real organized society, no economy to speak of, no trading, no industrious population. Then the fifth statement, there was never any expropriation of African land without compensation, no ethnocide, no genocide, only peacefully, mutually agreed land transfers, and a necessary use of only such force required to defend what was rightfully the land and development of Europeans. And then the sixth statement, there was widespread wretchedness of some Africans, but mostly Asians, known as Malays, who the Europeans, through a benevolent system of slavery, gave an opportunity for a hand up in life under far better conditions than they were used to. They were treated well and supplemented European labor and expertise to assist the Europeans to tame this wild land. And then the final statement, statement 7, God and science ordained a natural separation of beings into a racial order that can be classified in the form of a stairway of superiority and supremacism, from African darkness at the bottom to European whiteness at the top, where human type rather than humankind determined human worth and human intelligence. This demanded that political governance, opportunity, and identity required a system of race classification and exclusion of inferior races from the citadels of power in any socio-political and economic construct of South Africa. It is those 7 statements that underpin everything that is in the book. Everything in the book counters those 7 statements. And it might sound harsh to some people, those statements, but these statements are made every day. You see it on social media. Somebody like the former Premier, Helen Zille, made some of those statements in her utterances. It's so impregnated into the way South Africans think. And so what this book does is it breaks the paradigm of those statements, it challenges those statements, and it does so with hard facts and information. In this available time that we have today, it's just absolutely impossible to cover everything that's in this book, The Lie of 1652. It would be a couple of lectures a piece for every chapter. So what we're going to do is my focus is going to be on point 4 of those statements that I've made. And it's going to be on chapter 2 in the book. And in a sense, that is going to be able to give us a perspective on the whole book. In tackling the chapter on the founding of the Port of Cape Town, which is chapter 2, you will be able to note therein that there's a starting point here for each of the other chapters that deal with 2,000 years of early foundation history, that deal with those 19 wars, that deal with the beginnings of the seaborne migrations and the beginnings of the manipulation of identities. Now, the overarching theme of the book is that without honesty and restored memory, we will never be able to fashion the tools to deal with restorative justice. I can give you an example, just quick example. We take District 6. We have a notion of restorative justice that has been dragging its feet for the last 27 years, but the notion is that restorative justice is to give people who had title deed to property, to give them back their property. But we all know, if we use restorative memory, is that over 60,000 people, and if you multiply that now generationally to today, you're close on something like 800,000 people, that the vast majority of those people did not have title deed. They were renting properties and they had paid that property's worth over and over again over the generations of renting them. So without the proper restorative memory about District 6, you have the distortion that restoration means giving people who had title deed back their land. And that excludes the vast majority of ordinary working class people who never owned any property in District 6, but nonetheless suffered everything that everybody else suffered in terms of forced removal. So this is what I mean by that relationship between having the proper memory, the restored memory, so that it can inform what the restored justice actually looks like and how it's crafted. if you are not able to tackle restorative justice, then the whole dream of a united South African people in a thriving stakeholder democracy underpinned by constitutionalism, it's an unachievable pipe dream. Neocolonialism too will simply replace colonialism, and the dream of a future liberated from imperialism would also be a pipe dream. So how did this book come about? You know, how did I actually get to research and write it? And it's a journey. And this journey started actually with the second chapter, and all the other chapters, you know, flowed from that. And it goes back. What I did was I wrote that second chapter first, and then I wrote these other papers. So they actually, each chapter is a kind of standalone paper. And I originally put it together as something called the Camissa Embrace, an odyssey of an unrecognized African past. And then my good friend General Jeremy Veery put a word in with Tafelberg and told them, listen, you'll really want to publish this book, and that's how, you know, it got to be published. But I had always wanted to write an alternative history of South Africa from when I was a teen, and it all started when I was at high school, and we had this you know, I went to what was called an industrial trade school. So we basically did work with our hands and so on in workshops. But history was taught, and there was this priest, this radical Irish old man, Father Vincent. And he walked into that first standard 6 class on history, and he had the history book, and he was doing this with it, and he was eyeballing us, pacing up and down. And then suddenly, violently, he throws this book into the dustbin, shouting, rubbish, propaganda. I'm not going to teach you this rubbish. I refuse to teach you this rubbish. And then he said to us, look, I'm going to teach you history. And at the end of the year, a few days before the exam, I'm going to tell you what they want in that exam paper, and I'll coach you. And until then, just forget about this book. Let us look at history. And the first thing he said was, the first lesson was that all history is a version, it's a perspective, and that history as we know it, as it appears in books, to a large degree is there by powerful elites. It's the versions of powerful elites. So this was an extremely important thing for me. And, you know, in the days before I was forced to go into exile, and that I started 2 free newspapers in Cape Town. Each of them were successively banned. The one was Young Voice, and when that was banned, I brought it out as New Voice, and then that was banned again. But I began to start to write about this alternative history. And then when I was based in the Sorowe brigades in Botswana in exile, at night with a candlelight, I did my first attempt, and I created a cartoon history of South Africa. But that's quite a long time ago. So what happened here that motivated the actual book coming into production was that one day I was reading a maritime history book by a fellow by the name of Robin Knox Johnson. And in the text, something jumped out at me. It was a numeric, it was a figure. 1,730 Dutch ships came via the Cape to Asia between 1600 and 1700. And that immediately set me off thinking. And I said, man, look here. We've been told that only 42 ships came here between 1600 and 1652. So let me see what I can find out about how many ships of that 1,730 Dutch ships came here before 1652, and how do I go about doing this? So because I saw this as potentially challenging the entire South African history story. That simple numeric. So I managed to find that there was an organization called the Huygens ING Research Institute in the Netherlands, and that they had a database of 8,500 ships that had gone from the Netherlands to Asia between 1600 and 1795, and that the subset was within this database. So I managed to be able to get to see the database and the detail of it. Then the second major resource that I tapped into is that there were two world-class, world-renowned maritime historians at Leiden University, Gastra and Bruin, and they had done a number of works on the maritime history of the Indian Ocean arena, and they didn't just chart the Dutch ships; they also charted the French, the British, the Portuguese, the Danish ships that were going from Europe via the Cape to Asia. So they provided information that went beyond that 1,730 ships that Knox Johnson had spoken about. But they also provided further detail on the numbers of people on those ships, and the nature of those passengers and the produce that was carried and so on. And they also provided information on what ships, how many of those ships actually stopped over at the Cape and for what duration, and for which months that these ships actually came to the Cape and so on. And from the information from the Huygens database and from Gastra and Bruin, I was able to look at 9 questions that South African researchers and academic writers, novelists, school teachers were all rattling off. The first one was saying that there was only around 42 ships which visited the Cape before 1652. So I was able to challenge that. Then they said those few ships that stopped over at the Cape only came over 2 periods in a year, each of those periods roughly around 6 weeks. And the duration of the stay was minimal. They also asserted that most ships of the large numbers of ships that had gone from the Netherlands and from Europe to Asia actually never stopped at the Cape. They bypassed it. Then they also said that there was minimal contact with indigenous people and that there was no real trade. And then finally, they said that Table Bay could never be considered a port because there were no traders, nor a built harbour, nor any other built infrastructure associated with ports or proto-ports. They further said locals had no sense of land ownership, collective or individual. There was no indigenous agrarian or industrial development. There was no internal African trade with the South, and indigenous people had nothing to offer Europeans.